The price of a life in Chicago? 4 words on a crumpled receipt. Lorenzo Vitelli rules by fear, but he missed the shadow behind him until a waitress named Arya broke his cold reality with a single act of mercy, forcing us to ask, when a predator becomes the protected, is it a debt of honor or the start of a beautiful psychological tragedy?
Cielo Ristorante was an arena of engineered sound, a theater of manufactured calm. This was not chaos, but the opulent quietude bought by wealth. Glass met linen with rehearsed softness. Every motion was precise, executed by people who knew the value of their own time. The low, melodic Italian music suggested a night unbound by clocks. For 3 months, she had assimilated into this ecosystem, learning its language of scent, the early hint of garlic, 9 o'clock's caramelizing sugar, and the final olfactory sigh of a system after 6 hours at full throttle. Patrons were filed away in her mind by their gratuities. She understood that table 4, a deep corner banquette, was always claimed, its server invariably sent home before 2000 hours. This evening, a different man at table 4 disturbed the room's psychic equilibrium. His impact wasn't measured in looks or overt presence, but registered as a tangible shift in atmospheric weight. The space, once warm and filled with the self-important, now orbited a single male in a charcoal suit. The 3 others at his table were physically angled toward him in a silent display of fealty. He ate with deliberation, his face a neutral mask as he absorbed the words spoken to his left. His expression was a vacuum, devoid of boredom, pleasure, or a politician's practiced artifice. It was absolute stillness. It spoke of a deeply ingrained decision to offer no facial data for public consumption. The server, following protocol, fetched the water and moved through the room. It was in that moment she caught a conversation from a table by the window. The 2 men, clad in poorly fitting suits, spoke in a hushed, urgent blend of English and some other tongue. The server absorbed the critical words, the car, the back way, after he leaves. One word, however, ignited a primal fear, finito. Her past, lived in a high-stakes neighborhood, had taught her this word meant imminent threat. A deep, physical reaction took hold. Her eyes snapped to the man at table 4. Her certainty wasn't born of logic, but of pure instinct, likely cued by the other men's nervous glances and one's hand held unnaturally still beneath the table, hiding something. Perhaps her age, 24, and a life spent decoding the signatures of danger, informed her analysis. Witnessing the man's profound composure, she knew he was oblivious to the trap waiting outside. On her way back from the water station, she folded a note, scrawled on a receipt from her apron pocket. The message was 5 words: "Men at window, leave now." The script was marred by the tremor in her hand. A calculation of the fallout should have followed. She should have thought of Bastian, the man who had given her this specific shift 3 weeks ago, whose quiet instruction to notice things had come with a photo of table 4. She should have remembered her brother Nico and the likely reaction from Bastian's associates if she failed her unspoken task. Her route to table 6 brought her past table 4. She slipped the note into the left pocket of his jacket, which lay across the chair back, her move masked as picking up a dropped object. Her gaze remained down, a posture of submission meant to render her invisible. After setting the water at table 6 and fumbling in order, she heard the scrape of chairs from table 4, not rushed, but deliberate. The sound of a person who has received a threat and is already processing response. She did not watch him leave. Her attention was fixed on her notepad, the pen pressing hard into the paper. He stopped at the door. She felt his stare like a physical touch. The door swung open, letting in a shock of cold night air before closing again. The 2 men by the window shared a look, then one of them stood, The restaurant's rhythm continued undisturbed. The pianist played. Someone ordered the branzino. She left at 2300 hours and sat in her kitchen, wrapped in a dissociative calm. A call from Nico went unanswered. She forced a state of denial, framing the incident as over and her role in it complete. The next morning, her front door opened to two men in the hall who politely asked her to come with them. Her assumption that her involvement had ended proved to be a disastrous misjudgment. Her apartment, a space she had made her own over 8 months, became a sudden inventory of her life. 3 cracked mugs used as planters, an unframed picture of her mother, a list on the fridge starting with rent and ending with Nico, the last and most expensive item. She cataloged these things from the back of a black car that smelled of leather and something colder. It was the distinct chill of a man who has been waiting in the dark, and she fought a rising tide of sickness. The politeness of the two men was a jarring, unnerving detail. Their manner held no overt menace. One held the elevator, the other said, "Mr. Vitelli wishes to see you." The sentence hung with a pause that suggested a choice where none existed. Lorenzo Vitelli. In the 3 minutes it took to lock her apartment and step into the elevator, she ran a search on her phone. The results were immediate and sickening. The Chicago Tribune connected the Vitelli name to 3 decades of suspected organized crime. A grainy, long-lens photo was not enough for a clear ID, but more than enough to contextualize the world she had just stumbled into. The car stopped before a building in the north side, its architecture designed to make one feel small. It was made of pale stone and tall windows. Its main doors opened by a doorman before they even arrived. Inside, the marble floors felt cold through her shoes. The high ceilings, cream walls, and a floral display that probably cost more than her rent all reinforced the message of power. The air smelled of candle wax, coffee, and the faint, indefinable scent of old money. He was standing at the end of a long hall. There was no mistaking who he was. The restaurant's low light had obscured him, but she recognized his signature stillness immediately. He stood with precision, hands in his pockets, perfectly centered. It was the coiled posture of a patient hunter. His eyes were locked on her. "You could have been killed," he said, skipping all pleasantries. "I'm aware of that," she replied. The faintest trace of tension left his face. "Sit." He gestured to a high-backed chair nearby. She did as she was told. He remained standing, using height and space as a tool of command. It was a habit, she would come to understand, of remaking any room in his own image. "You're at Cielo. 3 months now," he stated, not asked. Before that, a Milwaukee Avenue diner, a catering firm. "You're a biology student at DePaul. You have a brother." "You ran a file on me overnight," she realized aloud. "I run a file on anyone who puts a hand in my pocket," he countered. "I saved your life." "You alerted me to a threat," he corrected, the distinction vital to his way of thinking. "Whether I'd have survived without your note is a different calculation." "You're welcome," she shot back, a foolish spark of defiance. He studied her again with that flat, unblinking focus. It was not coldness, but a state of intense concentration. It was the same focus he would give any subject that warranted his full attention. "The men by the window," he said. "You've seen one of them." Her hesitation was its own answer. He proved he could outwait silence. "I've seen him," she conceded. "He came into the diner months ago with someone else, asking about my brother." She took a breath. "I didn't say anything last night because I had no idea who you were. I passed you that note because I saw an ambush being set, and my conscience wouldn't let me ignore it. That's all." Silence stretched. Another man appeared in the doorway, broad, mid-40s, his face a map of old fights. He sized her up with an unreadable look before his eyes shifted to Lorenzo. A silent communication passed between them. "Marco," Lorenzo said, his gaze still on her. "Prepare the East Room." Marco's eyes flicked back to her, his expression softening just a fraction. Not friendly, but no longer hostile. He began a clinical assessment of the situation. "This changes things." "Your brother," Lorenzo said. "What did they want with him?" She felt the cold marble through her shoes, an acute discomfort mirroring the fracture in her mind. Her identity as a biology student, a neurotic server, was shattering. She was being redefined by the moment. "Money," she answered. "He owes a debt." Lorenzo gave a single spare nod. He started down the hall without a word, and she followed. The act was an unconscious surrender of trust, a move toward the one man who, paradoxically, felt like the only stable thing in this entire terrifying equation. By the second day, she had memorized the house's auditory signature, the groaning of its bones and its mechanical sighs, even a peculiar silence she could only define as waiting. Her insistence that she was not a prisoner was a fragile shield of self-deception, reinforced by the illusion of agency. A bathroom, a window, a lock on her door provided. Marco's arrival with coffee was a gentle piece of theater, a measured gesture of rapport. His words, "He won't hurt you," were aimed precisely at the heart of her fear, a clear sign her psychological state was being meticulously managed. "It wasn't," she answered, a lie of omission. Her thoughts remained shackled to her brother Nico. Marco said the name with the bloodless affect of a clinician reviewing a problem in a file. "We are looking into it. He does not know I'm here. He knows you are safe." A beat. Safer than the circumstances would suggest. She refrained from asking more, sensing the hard edge in his tone. By her third day, a new understanding of the hierarchy began to crystallize. She saw Lorenzo's brief, stark interactions not as coldness, but as a form of deference, a chilling recalibration of the mind that marks the onset of trauma bonding. This insight came not from words, but from watching the predatory grace of the men, the way their eyes dissected every corner. All conversation died the moment Lorenzo entered a room, a quiet born not of fear but of absolute conditioned focus on their center of gravity. In the kitchen on day 3, her presence was a disruption that made Marco pause, and she seized the opening to gather intelligence. "Tell me about him." "No, tell me about the organization. I'm done pretending I'm neutral." He weighed her, then conceded. "The Vitelli family has owned Chicago for 30 years. Lorenzo took over 6 years ago." Then, a critical piece of the puzzle. He is not a man who needs others to be afraid of him. That is what people don't understand. Fear creates chaos, not loyalty. He drank his coffee. Lorenzo is silent. What happened 6 years ago? The question was a scalpel. Marco paused. His sister. The name, the void that followed, the tightening of the muscle in his jaw. It was all the information she needed. A loss so profound it hardens into something other than grief. She felt a phantom echo of her own mother's death 4 years before, how she had rebuilt her life around the absence, becoming what she called the shape of what you've lost. That afternoon, she heard Lorenzo's voice through a door. It was Italian, spoken quickly and low, but the tone was a fracture in the cold baseline she had established. It held not coldness, but controlled tension, like a wire humming with strain. She continued up the stairs. At the landing, for a reason she could not name, she stopped. The wall was a curated history, a gallery of formal black and white portraits. A family. Hung just slightly apart from the others was the photograph of a young woman, no older than 19 or 20. Her hair was dark, and she was caught in the middle of a laugh, an image stolen from a moment of pure joy. The family resemblance to Lorenzo was both entirely missing and absolutely there. That evening at dinner, a disorienting ritual with 10 silent men. Marco sat beside her. His voice was a low conspiracy. Caruso is making moves on the north side. Caruso. She repeated the name. Dante Caruso. He watched her face. Is he the one your brother owes? Were his men at the restaurant? He just watched. The wealthy, it seemed, always had their deadly little games. She knew the agent's name who had found her. Bastian. Marco's face did not register surprise, but the quiet click of a theory being confirmed. Bastian works for Caruso. What were your orders at Silo? Table surveillance, she said. He told me to watch. He never mentioned. She trailed off. He didn't tell me who would be there. He just gave me a photo of the table. Not of Lorenzo. No. A long silence stretched between them. Then Marco said softly, You were supposed to report back to them. Instead, you warned Lorenzo. Yes. Why? She stared at her plate. The quality of the meal, like everything else here, was becoming disturbingly familiar. It was an irrational impulse, she said. After a moment, he offered an unnerving piece of comfort. Julia would have done the same. She didn't have to ask who Julia was. The data was already connecting. That night, the sounds outside her window changed. An absence in the ambient noise, the missing crunch of a guard's patrol. She moved against the wall, assuming the defensive posture. In the morning, she heard that 2 of Caruso's scouts had tested the perimeter. They hadn't gotten in. 3 of Lorenzo's men had followed them for 4 blocks and quietly removed them. The threat was no longer an abstract concept. It was now real. It was the 6th day. She had found a sanctuary in a second-floor library, a room with a worn leather sofa and a window that looked out onto the garden. She went there during the quiet hours of midday. He found her there, or perhaps he simply entered, unaware she had claimed the space. He stopped dead in his doorway, his face for a split second the face of a man who found his own home suddenly rearranged. Stay, he said as she made a move to get up. It wasn't a command, more a statement on the state of things. He took a chair on the far side of the room, opened a folder, and began to read with absolute absorption. She stared at her own book, reading the same paragraph 4 times. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It didn't carry the usual markers of anxiety. She, who tended to fill silence with nervous words, felt no need to speak. After 20 minutes, his eyes still on the file, he said, You aren't eating enough. I'm eating fine. You barely touched your dinner. She glanced up. He was still reading. You noticed that? He didn't answer. I noticed, she said, her voice measured, that you eat faster when you're processing information. He looked up from the page. That kind of intense observation, do I? And you always take the chair with a clear line of sight to the door. And the men's behavior toward you changes based on how much you've slept, which means you run on a sleep deficit. She stopped, having said too much. Sorry. I notice things. It's the skill you, or rather Bastian, hired me for. I never hired you for anything, he said, a factual correction with no heat behind it. Correct. Bastian did. The folder snapped shut. He set it on the arm of the chair. What was the exact amount Bastian told you your brother owed? She gave him the number, searching his face for a reaction that wasn't there. That's not the principal sum, Lorenzo stated. Caruso charges 250% interest per month. Whatever Nico took out 3 months ago is now. He cut the thought short, the math being irrelevant. Where is he, Arya? A place on the west side. He knows not to use it while I am. Her voice failed her. He knows to stay dark. Caruso's people already know where he is, he said, the lack of emotion in his voice making the words a death sentence. They've known for 2 weeks. He's still alive because he is being used as leverage. Against me, he specified. By using you. The room filled with a silence so thick I could hear a mantel clock I hadn't noticed before. My brother's life was a chess piece in a game against him, all because of the warning I had given. His expression wasn't an apology. It was a cold acknowledgement of the fact that we were both responsible. He glanced down at his own hands, perfectly still. I saw the faint scar there, saw the restraint of a man who had mastered every impulse. He stood, and when he moved to the door, he cut through my personal space deliberately. His knuckles brushed the back of the sofa as he passed, a brief, grounding touch like a man finding his footing on an unsteady ship. He never met my eyes. Long after he was gone, I stared at the spot his hand had touched. I tried to dismiss it. An accident, a man unfamiliar with sharing a room, but the lie felt thin and useless. From Lorenzo's perspective, for 20 minutes he had watched her act out the part of someone reading. It was a stillness he recognized from interrogations, the forced calm of subjects trying to mask their terror. She, however, felt no fear. She felt analytical. The distinction was absolute. When she listed her observations about him, it stirred something in him he had never felt before. He was used to being watched for weakness, not being catalogued with the detached interest one might reserve for a work of art. His hand on the sofa had been a dam, a physical check against the urge to stay in that quiet, unexpectedly comfortable room. He did not go back. On the 9th day, Nico called. Marco had given me a clean phone, which I knew meant it was monitored, not private. The device still felt alien in my hand when Nico's name flashed on the screen, and a band of ice tightened around my chest. His voice was a monotone, the words delivered from a script written by someone else, model. I need your location. Nico, just listen. I'd taken refuge in the airless bathroom, a bleak ritual that had become second nature. I know the shape of this, the money you owe, and whose hands are waiting for it. Have you told them anything? Only static answered. Nico. The address, he finally admitted. They pushed for the address. I swore I didn't know, but then they showed me a photo, Arya, of you walking into this place. His voice shattered. They're watching you. They have been for days. A cold dread coiled behind my ribs. Are you hurt? I demanded. No. Right now, this second, are you somewhere safe? Yes, The pause stretched. I think there's a man outside my apartment. Don't leave. I squeezed my eyes shut. I will handle this. Stay put. Do not go outside. I cut the connection and stood in the silent bathroom for 30 heartbeats before I sought out Lorenzo. He was with Marco and 2 others, their focus entirely on a spread of maps and surveillance shots. My arrival drew every gaze but his. Lorenzo, addressing the room, said simply, Give us the room. Their silent, instant obedience was a clear measure of his command. Caruso's people have a picture of me here, I said flatly. My brother gave them the location. He was pressured. He didn't know how to say no. Lorenzo's eyes were steady on mine. He's 21, I added, my voice turning to steel to hide the tremor. He doesn't understand them. He wasn't raised like I was. It was just a loan to him. Lorenzo remained quiet. You've been his shield for a long time. He is my brother. That isn't what I saw, he said, choosing his words with care. I saw you carrying his weight. The burden of him. The way you hold it isn't new. It's a well-worn habit. I could only stare, caught off guard by such a sharp dissection of my private truth. He needs to be brought here, I insisted. With him so close, Caruso can use him too. I am well aware of what Caruso can do. He rose to his feet. Marco is already on his way. Nico will be here in less than an hour. His gaze locked with mine. You should have told me about the call immediately. It just happened. I know. He walked to the door, then paused. Arya, the man at your Milwaukee apartment, months back, the one who asked about your brother. He waited. Did he threaten him directly? The question wasn't a search for information, it was a demand for confirmation. He said if I didn't help, Nico would be hurt, I replied. He sold it as a simple surveillance job. My coming to Lowe was under duress. You came because you had no other move to make, I corrected. And when you arrived, you were just... I faltered. I'd almost said, just a person. You were there, those men were planning, and I couldn't be a part of it. Me. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze analytical, collecting data for some future equation. Then he was gone. I sank into his massive office chair, lacing my fingers together, my thoughts on my brother and the 26 months since our mother's death. I traced the chain of decisions that brought me to this room, waiting for the board to dictate my next move. Let me be clear, staying was a choice. The fire escape I'd clocked earlier was a fleeting thought, dismissed. Not from fear, it was because Nico was coming, and Lorenzo's words, how you carry him, felt like the first time in years someone had truly seen me. I had no idea what to do with that feeling, but I knew I wasn't ready to run. Nico arrived, looking pale and hollow, as if he'd braced for a rage I didn't have in me. With a detached professionalism, Marco showed him to a room near mine. That night, their muted conversation drifted through the wall for what felt like hours. By morning, Marco's posture toward Nico had changed. It wasn't warmth, but something that had moved past condemnation. 4 days later, Caruso made his play. The attack came at 8 in the evening, the first sound cutting through the silence as I ate. It wasn't the cinematic explosion I might have expected. It was a single dry crack, then another. An alarm followed, its pulse conveying not panic but cold, lethal intent. The lights in the east wing died, replaced by a deep crimson glow, as though the very building was bleeding. Marco appeared in the doorway. With me, he ordered. He led Nico and me to a room deep in the building's core, sealed by a door of reinforced steel. Leaving a guard, he told me, "Don't open this for any face you don't know." I nodded. He disappeared. The 40 minutes that followed were the longest of my life. The sounds came in bursts, a silence punctuated by violence that was more unnerving than in constant battle. We heard muffled struggles inside the walls, a crash from the floor above, Nico uncharacteristically took my hand and said nothing, his silent grip more terrifying than the chaos outside. Then, a heavy, final quiet descended. The door swung open. It was Lorenzo, but transformed. The composed man from the library was gone. The control was there, but now it was a cage holding back something savage. His jacket was missing, and a dark bloom of red on his shoulder made me look, then quickly look away. His features were unchanged, but the stillness behind his eyes was different now. It wasn't patience. It was something more primal, held under immense pressure. His eyes found me first. "You're not hurt," he said. It was a statement, not a question. "No." My voice was a whisper. He glanced at Nico, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before returning to me. "We need to move you to the West Wing." "You're injured," I noted. "That is an established fact." "Lorenzo." I stood. "You are bleeding. I have some first aid training. You need to let me." His tone was different, stripped of its usual certainty. The way he looked at me had profoundly changed. The same intense focus was there, but a new current ran beneath it, an energy that had been absent from his previous calm. I would learn the cause later. 6 of Caruso's men had breached the north wall during a feint at the main gate. 2 had made it inside. Lorenzo met them on the 3rd floor. The wound on his shoulder was from a knife. He had clearly judged it an inconvenience not worth his time. That night taught me that the quiet, controlled man I had known for 2 weeks was a carefully constructed shell. What lay beneath was a mechanism of lethal, absolute, and instantaneous violence. The men he commanded had moved with a faith in his judgment that bordered on religious, and he had not failed them. I wasn't sure if that was a comforting thought. Later, in a West Wing sitting room, I faced him with a med kit and a confidence I didn't possess, cleaning the gash on his shoulder as he sat in perfect silence. Not a sound. Not even when the antiseptic bit into the wound. "This needs stitches," I told him. "I'm aware." "I can't do that for you here." "I know." His eyes never left my face. They weren't on the injury, they were on me. "You're not afraid of blood," he observed. "I'm afraid of many things," I replied. "Blood is just information." A beat passed. "I'm afraid of you," I admitted, the words escaping before I could stop them. The motion of the cleaning wipe stopped. His reply took a moment. When he spoke, his voice was deeper than I'd ever heard it. "I know." "Not," I started, then stopped. "Not in the way I first thought." I kept my eyes on the wound, unable to look at him and say the words. "I thought my fear was of what you are, of this world, of the things that happen in it." The wipe began to move again. Steady. "That's not what frightens me anymore." "Then what does?" I pressed the bandage down. His shoulder was hot under my palm. I didn't pull my hand away fast enough. "Myself," I said, "when I'm near you." The silence that followed was a physical presence in the room. He laid his hand over mine. It wasn't a grab or a restraint. It was a simple settling, his palm covering the back of my hand where it rested on the bandage, on his own skin. It felt like an act contemplated for a very long time. I didn't move. Outside, his men were scrubbing the evidence from the north fence as the city hummed on, oblivious. But in here, the warmth of his hand sealed mine to him, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. When he finally pulled away, the motion was slow, reluctant. "The fight's over," Marco said from the doorway. I had no idea how long he'd been standing there, his expression something I still had no name for. Lorenzo looked at Marco. "I know," he replied. After that, everything shifted. The rhythm of the house changed. More men appeared. Shifts were shorter. Conversations would die when I entered a room, only to reignite the moment I left. Lorenzo was everywhere and nowhere at once, a ghost who moved through the building, his presence lingering long after he'd gone. He found me in the library one night. We barely spoke, but the silence between us was different now. It was a familiar weight, charged with a new meaning. Nico grew frantic. His anxiety, always present, now had a razor's edge. Guilt made him unable to meet my eyes, his apologies for small things coming too fast and too often. Through the wall, Marco's voice had been a low murmur in 2 long sessions with him. Nico would emerge looking hollowed, wearing the haunted expression of a man forced to see his own reflection. "I should have told you about Bastion sooner," he confessed on the 3rd morning. "Yes," I answered. "I thought I could control it." "I know you did." I watched my brother, a boy of 21, so careless with the life I was conditioned to protect. "You will help them, Nico, with anything they ask. This is a debt that isn't about money." He nodded, looking small. That afternoon, Marco drove us to what Lorenzo called a secondary property. It was another building, stripped of beauty, built for function alone. It stood at the edge of a forgotten grid of warehouses and houses. The drive took 30 minutes. Marco spoke Italian into his phone from the front seat as I watched the city bleed past the glass, a memory of a life I no longer lived. An hour after we arrived, the attack began. I never saw it. I only heard its brutal symphony, 2 sharp cracks from the front, followed by a chorus of shouts. The building's alarm, a deeper, more urgent thrum than the house's. Then came a distinct sound that would become a scar on my memory, a noise that wasn't loud but carried the weight of a final, catastrophic failure. One of the men hurried us toward a back room, his gaze glued to the floor. His hands gave him away, locked into fists, so still they screamed of a desperate effort to hold himself together. "Marco," I breathed. "He's stable," the man said, but a hesitation in his voice made it a lie. Marco was not stable. A bullet had found him while he was getting Nico inside. A precise shot meant to disable, revealing they had intimate knowledge. He was alive, and he would stay that way. But for 2 hours, I sat against the wall outside that room, waiting. He was in their care, and I felt the cold, sharp understanding of the price of my new world. To be near Lorenzo, to be chosen by him, was to pay a toll in the people you came to care about. Nico sat beside me, utterly silent. Lorenzo arrived 40 minutes later, moving like a storm through the corridor. He went to the room, his eyes sweeping over the guards outside. He spoke 3 words in Italian that made them flinch. Then his eyes met mine. He didn't ask how I was. He could see the damage and offered no insulting comfort. "They knew our route," he said, his voice flat. The leak came from inside. My gaze shot to Nico. His was fixed on the floor. "Nico," I said, my voice a whisper I hadn't used in years. "Do you tell them where we were going?" The silence was an answer. "They called me this morning," he mumbled to the floorboards. "They said if I didn't," he choked on a name. "Arya." "I'm sorry, I didn't think they'd—" Lorenzo's hand rose, a single sharp gesture that froze the air. He studied Nico for a long moment with an expression I couldn't decipher and didn't want to. Then he looked at me. His eyes held a silent apology, the only one I would receive, and all I needed, because the rest was already understood. "He's my brother," I said. It wasn't an excuse, just a fact I was laying before him. "I know," Lorenzo answered and turned away from me. His world of aides and logistics rushed in to fill the space. I sat with Nico, holding my brother's trembling hand, thinking about how you can love someone and be furious with them at the same time. Two truths at war in your heart. By evening, we were separated. Me in one building, Nico in another. It was Lorenzo's decision, made without asking me. I understood. My consent wasn't needed. That night, a note appeared under my door. "He's safe. He understands. He'll be given a chance to earn his way back." Yes. It was Marco's handwriting, meaning he could hold a pen, and I held that paper for a long time, in a dark room in a city that now felt like foreign land. Caruso's men took me on a Tuesday. I'd started keeping track of the days again. The abduction was simple. It didn't need to be complex. The building was secure, but not a fortress, and Caruso's reach was long. I was, as he'd later tell me with a chilling smile, the simplest key for the most complicated lock. 2 men, a back exit, a car. 40 minutes later, I was inside another unfamiliar building. The room had one window, too high to see through, and a chair bolted to the floor. The hours that followed were not dramatic. They were a long, quiet emptiness. The man who came to see me, who I realized was Dante Caruso, was nothing like I'd imagined. He was calm, articulate. He had the same stillness as Lorenzo. But where Lorenzo's felt like coiled power, Caruso's felt like absence, as if a part of his soul had been surgically removed, leaving a sterile, empty space. He started telling me stories about Lorenzo. Some were designed to create fear, others to make me question everything. The most unsettling were the ones laced with undeniable truth. "He will not bargain for you," Caruso said clinically. "You need to understand that. Whatever you are to him, men like Lorenzo don't negotiate, they react." "Then he will react," I said. I saw a flicker of something like respect in Caruso's eyes. "You're not afraid." "I am afraid," I told him. "I just won't let you use it. Nothing you do can change what I did." I met his stare. "I'd do it again." He tilted his head. "Warn him again, even now." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" I gave him no answer. Not because I had none, but because my reason was mine alone, the one thing he couldn't have. They left me in the cold silence. I sat on the floor, refusing the chair because the floor was a choice. My back to the wall, I let my mind go to a forbidden place, the memory of Lorenzo's hand on mine, the warmth on the bandage, the afternoon light in the library, Marco's note, and a photo of a woman laughing at something I couldn't see. My mind didn't break. I say that with clinical certainty. Not from strength, but because there was nothing left whole to be broken. I was already a mosaic of repaired pieces. Outside my room, Lorenzo wasn't using strategy. He was moving through Caruso's city with a purpose that was more primal than a plan. Every resource, every man, 30 years of intelligence, all pointed at my location. From a hospital bed, Marco was directing the information, and Nico, the betrayer, was with them, given one chance to undo his sin. Within the second hour, they found the real leak, one who came before Nico, an older man named Ferrara, who had served Lorenzo's father. He had been feeding information to Caruso for 11 months. A devastating betrayal. The cost of that knowledge to Lorenzo was something I would only understand much later. My door was breached at the 6th hour. Lorenzo was not first. 2 men I didn't know burst in, then a third I recognized. A guard from the house, his face grim. And then Lorenzo. After 6 hours of silence, the room became chaos. He moved straight to me, seeing nothing else. "Are you hurt?" he asked. And his voice was a sound I'd never heard, not calm or controlled, but something raw, stretched to its absolute limit by pressure. "No," I said. His eyes scanned me, a frantic search for damage, trusting only what he could see. He gripped my shoulders, not softly, but with the anchoring force of someone who has just fought a war to get here. It was the grip of a man who had finally reached his objective. I pressed my forehead to his chest, felt the wild, unsteady beat of his heart, and I knew he had been terrified. Model. For 6 hours, the iron control of this formidable man had been broken by fear. A heavy silence stretched between us. "Caruso," I murmured against his chest. "We have his location." Lorenzo's voice was low. "Then go," I answered. He pulled away, forcing my eyes to his. This wasn't romance. It wasn't clean. It was the rawest truth since I'd slipped a note into a coat and walked away. I was not a passive victim in that room. Let the record show. When the lock first turned, I spent 20 minutes mapping my cage. The window was real glass, a taunt set too high to reach. The door was a solid slab of wood, bolted from the world outside. The chair was fixed, but the seat was a separate piece held by 4 screws. An impossible puzzle without a tool. In the far corner, a faint line at the baseboard betrayed a weakness. A subtle flaw born of age and decay. I did not escape. I claim no such victory. But by the 2nd hour, a strategy had formed, and I stood pressed against the wall. When the door finally burst open, I was not waiting in the center. I was at the threshold, forcing the first man to recoil and his backup to stumble. Lorenzo entered third, stepping not into a static rescue, but a scene already in violent motion. He saw it. His eyes took it all in with that silent, total comprehension, slotting this new data into the profile he was building of me. A profile that was veering into uncharted territory for us both. Caruso's lair was 3 miles away. Lorenzo went there as I was driven back to the main house, as I preferred. I knew my role, and it was not on a battlefield. To be a fragile piece in such a savage game would only endanger a team already stretched to its breaking point. Nico came with me. He sat across from me in the car, his eyes lost to the ghosts outside, and I watched him for a long time before I spoke. "You were part of the search." "I wasn't going to sit in a room while—" "I know." I cut in. He finally met my gaze. My brother, 21, making choices from a place of terror, the oldest catalyst for all bad decisions. "Can you forgive me?" "It's already done," I said. "But that doesn't mean we can erase what happened." "I know." The car sliced through the city streets. Chicago looked painfully the same. That was the dizzying part these last few weeks. The world kept spinning. People went to restaurants, walked their dogs, fought over parking spaces. The world I now lived in had its own brutal climate, and the 2 realities existed side by side. I had crossed from one to the other, and there was no marker for where the border lay. At 3 a.m, Lorenzo came back. I heard the front door. I was in the library. Sleep had been an impossible wish for a mind like mine. I heard his footsteps in the hall and waited for them to climb the stairs. They stopped outside the library. After a long beat of silence, the door opened. He just stood there in the frame. He looked like a man who had walked through an inferno and was now checking to see what was left of himself. The bones of his face were the same, but something deep beneath the surface had been fundamentally altered, as if the very frame of him had been rearranged. I asked, "Is it over?" "The Caruso has been eliminated," he said. "And his network?" He hesitated. "They will be forced to choose new loyalties. Most will look for a new—" "Shattered," he said. "It will take time to confirm, but it is shattered." He crossed the room and sat on the sofa opposite me, the closest he'd ever dared to be in this room, and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, staring at his own hands. "Ferrara," he said after a while. "Marco told me," I said. I couldn't finish the thought. "You trusted him for a long time." "Since I was 20, he said. He worked for my father." I didn't offer sympathy. The words always feel like hollow shells. Instead, I said, "That kind of betrayal is a different kind of wound." "Yes." Silence fell. "What did it cost you?" I asked. "Tonight." He looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I tried to map his pathology. Caruso wasn't just an enemy, he was a sickness. You once told Marco that he was what this business becomes when it rots, when it loses the last thing keeping it from being pure destruction." I held his gaze. "To beat him, you had to go to that same dark place inside yourself, didn't you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes." "And you did it anyway?" "Yes." "For me." He held my eyes, and for a moment it wasn't his calculated stare, but something raw and exposed, among other reasons. I nodded, accepting it. I knew the other reasons were his empire, his men, his family's name, and I also knew, with a certainty that needed no vanity, that I was woven into the fabric of all of them. "One of us might not make it through this," I said, the thought a ghost from the car ride spoken aloud. "Which one?" he asked. I looked at him, this man who built a beautiful, terrible kingdom and held it together with nothing but the force of his will, who lost his sister and turned his heart to stone instead of shattering, who read a note from a waitress and came back again and again. "Neither, I said. "I don't think either of us is going to survive it." He stared at me, then said, almost to himself, "No." The final battle with Caruso was not the clean execution I'd imagined. I learned this from Marco, who was on his feet a week later against all medical sense, and who told me the story because he knew my soul needed the clinical facts. Caruso had been waiting for them. His choice to stay, Marco said, wasn't arrogance, but a conscious decision to orchestrate this final bloody scene. He and Lorenzo had one last dialogue, a communion reserved for men who have walked parallel paths of violence to arrive at the same grim destination. Caruso's final words, Marco recounted, were a poisoned mirror. "You are no different from me. Your story is just prettier." After a long, heavy pause, Lorenzo's answer was a fatal admission. "I know. So, the spiritual surrender was absolute, though the physical end was chaos. 2 of Caruso's men died inside the building. 1 of Lorenzo's own was critically wounded. As for Caruso, Marco chose his words carefully, saying only that he would no longer be an operational concern. The more crucial detail Marco stressed was the seismic shift in Lorenzo. He came back altered, not broken, but changed in the specific way a man changes after crossing a moral horizon from which there is no return, and choosing to live in that new, darker world. His control was always absolute, Marco noted. Now, the reason for it is different. He said 1,000 things with his eyes before his professional mask slipped back on. He corrected himself. His self-control is for you now. It's not for show or to seem less of a threat. He is carefully crafting every move because he knows you are always watching. That's an impossible burden for him, I observed. Yes, Marco agreed. It is also the most humanizing thing that has happened to him in 6 years. The following week brought a storm of consequences I could only glimpse. Meetings and calls, strategic moves to claim territory and forge new alliances, signaled a violent remaking of his world. I was excluded from the planning, but my presence in the house was a quiet gravity, drawing Lorenzo to the library each night where I had become a fixture. The final act of violence came from a misjudged threat, a subordinate of Caruso's named Voss, whose loyalty was to the man's ideology, not his money, a far more dangerous fanaticism. He attacked the house with 4 men on a Thursday afternoon when the guard was light. They breached the main gate, 2 of them. I was in a hallway when the sirens began to wail. My instinct was not to hide, but to move toward the sound of chaos, a primal, not heroic impulse. This wasn't the move of a warrior, but of someone who would no longer stand passively behind the master of this house. My intervention was simple. I opened the door to the front room and let out a sharp, piercing scream. The noise caused the nearest gunman to turn, creating a 1-second window for Lorenzo to eliminate him. It was a small act, but it was mine. Across the blood-splattered room, Lorenzo's face wore an expression I'd never seen. A look of profound shock, as if an unknown force had just torn through his controlled reality and upended its very foundations. The 2 intruders were dealt with. With Caruso's insurgency finally crushed, a quiet descended over the organization. The war was done. The phrase echoed in my mind like an exhale of held breath. I sat in the sitting room, my spine against the wall, in the cool light spilling from the windows, thinking of the restaurant, the piano, the note folded in 20 seconds, and the chasm of experience that separated then from now. Uncharacteristically, Lorenzo was seated near me. "It's over," I said. "Yet," he affirmed. We lingered in that stillness for a long time. The first day that felt truly normal dawned on a Thursday 6 weeks later. I know because a new list I'd made, tacked to the fridge, was marked with the day. The refrigerator belonged to a kitchen, not my own, inside the North Side house, a place I had imagined would feel temporary, but had shed that quality around the 4th week. I was finishing my degree via online seminars, having received a much-needed extension on a paper. My biology texts occupied a library shelf next to a collection of Italian literature I approached in slow, infrequent intervals. Nico was housed across town in a smaller flat, working for a cleaning company with ties to Marco. He called twice a week. He was undertaking the arduous, incremental work of changing his ingrained behaviors, the only path that yields results. His impulse to apologize remained a twitch. He was 21. I held on to hope for his future. Marco joined us for dinner on Tuesdays, always alone. His wife, he'd said, found these nights taxing, a sentiment I completely understood. He and I had developed a rapport that defied simple definition. It wasn't friendship, but a specific bond between 2 people who had weathered the same storm from an identical vantage point. He had taken to offering small, unsolicited fragments of Lorenzo's childhood as if gentling a skittish animal. He used to carry birds into the house. Marco revealed one Tuesday, injured ones. His mother would set them free, but he always managed to find them again. He paused. He'd watch over them for hours, not to help them fly, but just so they wouldn't be alone. I watched Marco stare intently at his plate. "I understand," I replied. The household staff had grown accustomed to me the way one adjusts to new furniture. That subtle shift when an object stops being foreign and simply exists. I was not, it appeared, the figure they had envisioned. I was neither a decoration nor a prisoner, and I showed no outward fear of them, a detail that seemed to perplex them most of all. Lorenzo's proposition came in the library. I call it that. He sat across from me on a Wednesday night and said without ceremony, "I need you to stay." My eyes locked with his, and in that shared gaze, we both knew this was the conversation we had deferred for 2 months. "In this house," I stated, seeking clarity. "In this life," he confirmed, "with me." There was no bended knee, no ring. The lamp in the corner cast its usual glow, the mantel clock ticked away the seconds, and the city hummed its low song outside. I looked at this man and recalled the man I had seen. Patient, savage, meticulous, and in flashes, completely unguarded. I weighed the psychological toll it took on him, the ongoing price, the cost to me. "I'm finishing my degree," I said, a condition. "I'm aware." "And Nico will need time to adjust." "I am aware. And there are parts of this world I will never accept." "I am aware. And you have to be completely honest with me," I mandated, "about what this life entails. Its pressures, not the criminal details. I'm not asking for confessions, but you must tell me when the danger returns, when I need to know." He gave a genuine nod, not a performance. "Then yes," I said. Not a romantic surrender, but a clear-eyed, conscious choice. "This is the decision I'm making. Yes." He reached over the table, his hand covering mine, the same hand in the same position as the bandaged one weeks before. I looked down at it, feeling the profound stillness of a settled matter, a verdict requiring no appeal. The lamp continued its vigil. The clock kept time. Marco, who had appeared in the doorway at some point, quietly vanished. He would later claim he was looking for a book. 8 months after a folded receipt and 4 words, the wedding was a spare affair. In attendance were Marco, who was overcome with an emotion he would forever deny; Nico, who sat ramrod straight in the front row, visibly trying in the way of someone still proving their worth; and 2 of Lorenzo's men, whose long service had earned them the right to have opinions on the matter, which they kept sealed behind their eyes. My dress was not white, a practical decision. We went back to the restaurant where it all started. This was Lorenzo's idea, which I found startling. When I said so, he gave me a look I'd learned meant, "I have thought about this more than you know," and said nothing more. Cielo Ristorante on a Friday night had the same sonic texture. The piano, or one just like it, and the muted hum of an expensive room. We were shown to the table at the back left corner. Our waiter was a young man I didn't recognize, anxious but competent, who stole glances at Lorenzo the way most people did, a habit I'd lost, as the weight of Lorenzo's focus had become a known constant over 8 months, and familiarity breeds its own kind of shield. Halfway through dinner, my eyes caught on a man at a table across the room. Not a threat. My ability to assess risk was now finely tuned. He was a civilian, eating by himself, an umbrella propped on his chair. His phone had slipped from the table, landing unseen behind him. I watched the phone for a second, then the man. He was lost in his meal, in his own world. I told Lorenzo, "I'll be right back," and stood. I walked across the restaurant, picked up the phone from the floor and set it on the table by the man's plate. He looked up, first shocked, then thankful. I gave a small nod and went back to our table. I sat down and picked up my fork. Lorenzo was watching me. I met his gaze. What? He was quiet for a beat. His expression was a layered thing I still lacked the words for. Its meaning was always shifting. Then he said very softly, "Nothing." But his hand found mine on the table, not just resting on it this time. His fingers threaded through mine, tightened and stayed. I looked at him. "You've been watching me since the day we met." "I know. Why?" The silence that followed stretched so long I almost took back the question. In the hospital, the year after my sister died, an old man was in the next bed. His television was always on, but he never watched it. Every morning, the nurses brought his breakfast. He would eat about 2/3 of it and push the rest aside. And every morning, when the nurse came back, he'd point to the leftover food and say, "This is for someone who needs it more than I do." A beat of silence. He did it every day, not so it would happen, but because it was who he was. It was the only thing he could still control. My eyes refocused on Lorenzo. "You reminded me of him," he said. "The note. You didn't stay to see how I'd react. You didn't wait for any acknowledgement." He turned my hand over in his. "You gave something valuable and just left. And I cannot understand why that." He stopped, searching for the right words. "I have lived for 30 years in a world where every action is a transaction, where every gift creates a debt. And you just," he shook his head slightly, "you just walked away." A slow Italian melody drifted from the piano. My mind filled with a cascade of images, a folded receipt on a cold counter, 2 years of lists, Nico's voice on the phone, a picture of a smiling girl, and Marco's tears at a small wedding. All of it distilled into the pressure of this man's hand. "That's a pattern of mine," I conceded. "I know," he said. "It still creates a dissonance for me." The life of the restaurant buzzed around us. The candles burned lower. The night moved toward its own end, unhurried, as if it had all the time in the world. I looked at the man across from me, a figure of both menace and precision, the ruler of a fragile empire who had offered me the truth of its nature, who had once laid his hand over my bandaged one, asking a question, waiting for an answer. I felt the weight of my promise and the world that came with it, and felt no desire to turn from either. I squeezed his hand. I lifted my fork. We continued our dinner.